The sun had barely risen above the horizon, painting the sky over the Austin suburbs a soft pink. Jack Murphy methodically stowed his gear in his battered green Ford truck. Rifle, ammo, tent, sleeping bag, everything he needed for a 2-day hunt. He smoked leisurely, watching the light morning mist dissolve into the air. Emily stood on the doorstep of their 1-story house, tying the waistband of her silk robe. Her blonde hair was still mussed after her nap. "Are you sure you want to go alone?" she asked, sipping coffee from a ceramic mug labeled Best Husband. "You usually ride with Harry or Pete." Jack slammed the truck door shut and turned to his wife. A slight smile appeared on his unshaven face. "I need to clear my head, honey. That last project at work sucked all my energy out. I want to be alone with nature for a couple days." He walked over to Emily and kissed her cheek. She tensed faintly, but immediately relaxed and smiled. "I'll be back Sunday night. Don't miss me." Jack got behind the wheel, started the engine, and, waving to his wife, pulled onto the road. In the rearview mirror, he saw Emily standing there watching him. Her face was impenetrable. The truck turned off the main road after an hour and a half of driving. The truck led into a wooded area near Bastrop, Jack's favorite place to hunt. He'd been here dozens of times before and knew every trail. But this time there was something special about the cool October air, the rustle of golden leaves underfoot, some kind of foreboding. Parking the truck in a small clearing, Jack pulled out his gear and headed deep into the woods. He planned to reach his usual spot, a small hunting ground a couple of kilometers from the road. It was going to be a good day for hunting quiet and clear. Emily, meanwhile, went back into the house and closed the door behind her. Only then did her face change. The tension was gone, giving way to cold determination. She pulled out her cell phone and dialed a number. "He's gone. Everything's going according to plan." She dropped the call without waiting for an answer and went upstairs to the bedroom. Opening the closet, Emily pulled a small box from the top shelf where she kept her papers. Marriage certificate, insurance policies, Jack's will. She thumbed through the papers, lingering her gaze on the insurance amount figures. $500,000, enough to start a new life. 3 days later, Tuesday morning, Emily called the police. Her voice shook with excitement. "My husband. He didn't come back from the hunt. I've been waiting for him since Sunday. He's never done this before." The officer on the other end of the line asked a few standard questions. Description, what he was wearing, where he was headed. Emily answered clearly and in detail, as if she had prepared in advance. "Officer, I'm very concerned. This doesn't look like him at all." An hour later, Detective Alex Holliday showed up at the Murphy house. A tall man with shrewd gray eyes and premature gray on his temples. He listened patiently while Emily told her version of events. "Jack left Friday morning, said he'd be back Sunday night. It's a proven place. He hunts there often, in the woods near Bastrop." Holliday was making notes in a small notebook. He noticed the perfect order of the house, the lack of family photos on the walls, the way Emily twirled her wedding ring nervously on her finger. "Mrs. Murphy, has your husband had any problems lately? At work, perhaps? Or between the two of you?" Emily thought for a moment before answering. "Jack's been a little depressed the last few months. Work, stress, you know." She paused. "And to be honest, we've had some difficulties in the marriage." Holliday nodded, continuing to write. "Did he ever talk about leaving? Starting over?" "No," Emily answered too quickly, then corrected herself. "I mean, not directly, but sometimes I thought he was unhappy, tired of everything." The detective lifted his gaze from his notebook and looked at the woman carefully. Something in her story seemed disingenuous to him, but he couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. "We'll start the search today. We'll need his photos, a list of contacts, places he might have shown up." By late afternoon, the search operation was in full swing. Police officers with dogs combed the woods around Jack's hunting spot. They found his truck in a clearing, but no sign of the man himself. The dogs lost the trail a few hundred yards from the truck. Holliday stood beside the truck, examining the contents of the cab. Nothing unusual. A map of the area, empty soda cans, a lighter. On the dashboard, a small souvenir compass with the initials DM engraved on it. "Detective," one of the officers called out to him. "We found his rifle. It was hidden under a pile of leaves 300 meters from here." Holliday frowned. Strange. A hunter would never voluntarily part with his weapon, unless he was forced to, or unless he wanted to fake an accident. When darkness fell, the search had to be suspended until morning. Holliday returned to the Murphy house to give Emily the news. She sat on the couch, wrapping her arms around herself as if she was cold despite the warm evening. "We found his car and his rifle," the detective said, sinking into the chair across from her. "But no sign of your husband yet." Emily nodded, her eyes dry. "What now?" "We'll continue the search tomorrow. We'll expand the area. We'll check hospitals, motels, every possible place." He watched her reaction carefully. Most wives in this situation would have been hysterical by now, but Emily remained remarkably calm. Too surprising. "Mrs. Murphy, I need to ask you a few questions. Where were you on Friday and the weekend?" Emily tensed slightly. "I was at home, went to the supermarket on Friday, then stopped by to see a friend, Sandra Mitchell. Saturday worked on a project for the bank. Sunday I waited for Jack." "And no one can confirm that you were home on those days, apart from Sandra on Friday?" "No, I was alone, but you don't think—" Her voice trembled. "You don't suspect me, do you?" Holliday shook his head. "These are standard questions, Mrs. Murphy. We have to check all leads." The next day, the search resumed with renewed vigor. The police were joined by volunteers, Jack's friends and co-workers. They searched every bush, every tree, but to no avail. It was as if Jack Murphy had vanished into thin air. Holliday, meanwhile, was checking bank accounts and phone records. No activity since Friday. No credit cards were used. Phone was turned off. Last call was to his wife before driving into the woods. The detective also met with Jack's co-workers at the engineering firm where he worked. All as one spoke of him as a reliable, responsible man. No one believed he could have just walked away, leaving everything behind. "Jack was attached to his work," said his boss, Mr. Parker. "He had an important project, a presentation on Monday. He would never have missed it for nothing." "What about his family life?" Holliday asked. "Did you notice any problems?" Parker was silent for a moment, mulling over an answer. "You know, he's really been out of sorts lately. Distracted, brooding. One day I happened to overhear a phone conversation. He was arguing with someone. With his wife, I think. It was about money. By the end of the week, police officially categorized Jack Murphy's disappearance as missing under suspicious circumstances. Holliday was increasingly inclined to think there was a crime involved, but he had no proof. He met up with Emily again at their house. She looked tired, with shadows under her eyes, but her gaze still lacked the desperate hope that you usually see in the relatives of missing people. "Mrs. Murphy, I have to ask you straight out," the detective began. "Do you believe your husband is alive?" Emily stared out the window for a long moment before answering. "I don't know, detective. I really don't know. But the longer he's gone, the more I think that he's just gone. From me, from everything." "Why do you think that?" "Jack, he's changed lately. Became distant, cold. We've hardly spoken at all. I think he's been planning this for a long time." Holliday leaned forward. "Do you have any proof? Something to back up this theory?" Emily shook her head. "Just my feeling. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of him looking at me, like he was already saying goodbye." The detective knew it was a lie. Everyone who knew Jack Murphy said with one voice that he wasn't the type to abandon his commitments. But he had nothing to refute Emily's words. Days went by. Weeks went by. The search was slowly winding down. All trails were dead ends. No leads. No witnesses. Jack Murphy had vanished into thin air. Emily began the process of recognizing her husband as dead. Usually it takes years, but her lawyer assured her that under such suspicious circumstances, the court could speed up the procedure. Holliday continued to work on the case in his spare time, but the investigation was officially suspended for lack of evidence. He knew he was missing something, some important detail, but he couldn't figure out what it was. Life in suburban Austin went on as usual. Emily Murphy was slowly returning to normal. She rarely spoke of her missing husband, and soon the neighbors stopped asking questions. Jack's story became another urban legend. Remember that guy who disappeared while hunting? Only Detective Holliday couldn't forget the case. Every time he drove past Murphy's house, he had a strange feeling, a mixture of disappointment and confidence that the truth was out there. All he had to do was find the right angle. One day, he saw a blue pickup truck pull into the yard of Emily's house. A stout man of about 35 got out of the car and headed confidently toward the door. Emily met him on the doorstep with a smile. They embraced not as friends, but as lovers who had known each other for a long time. Holliday made a mental note to check the man out. Perhaps it meant nothing, or perhaps it was the missing piece of the puzzle. But time passed, new cases demanded attention, and Jack Murphy's case gradually receded into the background. It remained on the list of unsolved cases, one of those cases that haunt detectives in their sleep. 5 years later, when almost everyone has already forgotten about the missing hunter, fate has prepared an unexpected turn, a twist that would change everything. The hot July sun was scorching mercilessly. Turning the truck stop into a red-hot frying pan, patrol officer Daniel Reyes drove slowly between the rows of parked trucks, lazily glancing around. Regular duty on Highway 100 in suburban Albuquerque, New Mexico, rarely brought anything interesting, especially in this heat wave when even criminals preferred to rest in the shade. Officer Reyes reached for his water bottle and took a big gulp. The air conditioning in the patrol car was running at full blast, but that didn't help the sweltering heat. He was planning to take a quick look around the parking lot and head on down the road when his gaze caught on something odd. An old green Ford with Texas license plates. Normally there was nothing remarkable about it, but the license plate seemed vaguely familiar to Reyes. He slowed down and took another look. Something came to mind, an orientation card that had been sent out years ago. Reyes stopped the car and ran the license plate through the onboard computer. After a few seconds, the system came up with a result, and the officer whistled. The license plate belonged to the truck of Jack Murphy, who had gone missing in Travis County, Texas, 5 years ago. The case was still listed as open. Reyes took a deep breath and called for backup. Then, checking his weapon, he cautiously approached the truck. Someone was clearly inside. The curtains on the windows were drawn, but light was shining through the gap. The officer tapped on the cab door with the handle of his flashlight. "Albuquerque Police, open up!" A rustle inside, then the door slowly opened. A swarthy, middle-aged man with a short beard looked sleepily at Reyes. He was dressed in a faded t-shirt and jeans. "What's the problem, officer?" the man asked in a slight accent. "Your papers, please, and your car registration," Reyes said firmly, keeping his hand on his gun. The man shrugged and reached into the inside pocket of the jacket hanging on the back of the driver's seat. He handed the officer a tattered driver's license and registration papers. Reyes scrutinized them. "Marco Gonzalez?" he clarified, checking the photo on the license against the man's face. "Yes, sir." "Mr. Gonzalez, this truck is wanted. You are under arrest on suspicion of vehicle theft. Step out of the vehicle, please." Marco looked genuinely surprised. "What wanted list? I bought this truck 3 years ago. I have the papers." But Officer Reyes was already handcuffing him, reading him his driver's license. 5 minutes later, backup arrived, and Marco Gonzalez was taken to the station for questioning. The next day, Detective Alex Holliday sat in his office at the Austin Police Department reviewing a report from New Mexico after all these years, a lead. He straightened, feeling his pulse quicken. This was his chance to finally solve the case that had kept him busy all these years. A lot had changed in 5 years. Holliday had been promoted to DCI, gone even grayer, gotten divorced. But one thing remained the same: his certainty that Jack Murphy's disappearance was not a voluntary departure. He immediately called his colleagues in Albuquerque to arrange a video interview of the detainee. An hour later, he was already looking at Marco Gonzalez's face on the computer screen. "Mr. Gonzalez, I'm Detective Alex Holliday of the Austin Police Department. I'm handling the case of Jack Murphy, whose truck is now in your possession." Marco looked exhausted and confused. "Detective, I don't know anything about the theft. I bought this truck from a man in El Paso 3 years ago. Paid $3,000 in cash. I have the sales contract." "This man, what's his name?" "Rick Tanner," that's how he introduced himself. "I found the ad online. We met in a supermarket parking lot. I inspected the car, paid the money. He handed me the keys and paperwork. Everything was legit, I swear. Holiday tapped his pen on the desk thoughtfully. Mr. Gonzalez, can you describe this Rick Tanner? Marco shrugged. White male, about 35 to 40 years old, medium height, short dark hair. Nothing special. What about a phone number, email? I had his number, but when I tried to call a few days later, I wanted to ask about some engine knocking. The number was no longer working. Holiday realized that Gonzalez was probably telling the truth. He was just another link in the chain behind which the real culprit stood. Mr. Gonzalez, I'm going to ask you to work with an artist to put together a portrait of this Tanner, and I'll need all the documents he gave you. After speaking, Holiday leaned back in his chair, contemplating the situation. Jack Murphy's truck had turned up 5 years later in a completely different state. It was the first real lead since the disappearance. He opened the old case file and looked through the photos again. Jack Murphy is a tall, athletically built man with an open smile. His wife Emily is an attractive brunette with cold eyes. The scene is an empty clearing in the woods, an abandoned truck, a hidden rifle. No sign of a struggle, no sign of blood. Perfect disappearance. Holiday always suspected that Emily had something to do with her husband's disappearance. Too cold-blooded in her behavior, too quick to jump to the procedure of pronouncing him dead. And then there was this man, Ryan Blackwell, whom she'd started dating just a few months after Jack's disappearance. Coincidence? Holiday didn't believe in coincidences, but he had no proof, nothing but intuition and conflicting testimony, until today. Holiday dialed the judge's number to get a search warrant for the new home of Emily Blackwell, maiden name Carson, formerly Murphy. 2 years after Jack's disappearance, she married Ryan Blackwell and moved to a more upscale Austin neighborhood. The $500,000 insurance policy she received after her husband was declared dead apparently came in handy. After getting the warrant, Holiday contacted the crime lab. Jack's truck would be taken to Austin for a thorough examination. Technology had advanced in 5 years, and it was now possible to detect traces that would have gone undetected before. Emily Blackwell was watering the roses in her manicured garden when a police car swerved into the driveway. She straightened, tensely scrutinizing the face of the detective who stepped out of the car. Recognizing Holiday, she turned pale. Mrs. Blackwell, Holiday emphasized her new last name. I need to talk to you. May I come in? Emily took off her gardening gloves and nervously brushed her hair back. Of course, detective. Is something wrong? Holiday followed her into the spacious living room. The house was tastefully furnished, new furniture, expensive paintings on the walls. Life was clearly favoring her. We found your ex-husband's truck, Mrs. Blackwell, in New Mexico. Emily froze for a moment, then slowly lowered herself onto the couch. Really? After all these years, what does that mean? It means we're reopening the investigation. The truck is now being transported to our lab for a thorough examination. Holiday watched her reaction carefully. She was good, a near-perfect portrayal of surprise and slight concern, but he noticed her fingers clenched into a fist so tight her knuckles turned white. Detective, I don't see how this can help. Jack's been missing for 5 years. The court declared him dead. I'm trying to move on with my life. I understand, Mrs. Blackwell, but justice has no statute of limitations, especially when it comes to possible murder. Her eyes widened. Murder? You've always suspected that, haven't you? You always thought I had something to do with it. Holiday shrugged. I'm just following the clues, and now they've led me here. He pulled a photograph out of a folder. Do you recognize this man? The photograph showed a middle-aged, blonde-haired man with cold blue eyes. A composed portrait of the man who sold the truck to Marco Gonzalez. Emily only caught a glimpse of the photo. No, I've never seen him. Too bad. This man calling himself Rick Tanner sold Jack's truck to a certain Marco Gonzalez in El Paso 3 years ago. I wonder how the truck got to him, don't you? Emily swallowed nervously. Detective, I'm asking you to leave. If you have specific charges, talk to my attorney. Otherwise, please leave me alone. Holiday nodded and stood up. Of course, Mrs. Blackwell, but I'll be back. With or without specific charges, it depends on the results of the examination. Leaving the house, the detective did not leave immediately. He parked a few houses farther down the street and waited. His patience was rewarded 20 minutes later when Emily ran out of the house and got into her silver BMW. She took off and drove toward the center of town. Holiday followed her at a safe distance. Emily reached the industrial district and stopped near a construction site. A new shopping center was being built, and helmeted workers were everywhere. She jumped out of the car and walked briskly to a temporary office at the edge of the site. Holiday saw her literally burst inside. A moment later, a man emerged from the office, tall, athletic, with a square jaw and short haircut. Ryan Blackwell, Emily's husband. He worked as a construction foreman. Emily spoke to him, gesturing vigorously. Even from a distance, it was obvious that she was agitated and scared. Ryan, on the other hand, remained calm, though his face grew increasingly somber as he spoke. "Gotcha," Holiday muttered, taking a few pictures on his phone. He was sure now, these two were hiding something, and that something had to do with Jack Murphy's disappearance. Back at the station, Holiday immersed himself in studying the documents. Now that he knew what to look for, many of the details began to come together. Ryan Blackwell worked at the same construction site 5 years ago when Jack disappeared that weekend. According to the timesheet, he was supposedly sick and didn't show up for work. Emily and Ryan began dating openly 4 months after Jack's disappearance. They were married 2 years later, right after Emily got insurance. Each of them had an alibi for the day of the disappearance. Emily claimed she was at home and then stopped by a friend's house. Ryan said he was laid up with the flu, but no one but that friend, Sandra Mitchell, could confirm their story. And Sandra herself, as it turned out, had received a substantial sum from Emily in the form of a friendship loan shortly after Jack's disappearance. Holiday leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. He felt he was close to a clue, but he was still missing a crucial clue. Something that could link Emily and Ryan directly to Jack's disappearance. There was a knock on his office door. It was Lisa Chen, the forensic scientist working with him on the case. "Alex, I have something interesting," she said as she stepped inside. "We've started examining Murphy's truck. Preliminary results show traces of blood on the truck's upholstery under the passenger seat. Tiny droplets that have been thoroughly cleaned up, but modern techniques can detect them." Holiday pitched forward. "Are you sure?" 99%. We're running a DNA test now to confirm it's Jack's blood. But there's something else. In the crack between the seat and the door, we found a hair. It's long, female, and it doesn't belong to the victim. "Emily," Holiday exhaled. "We'll run the DNA as soon as we get a warrant for the sample. But Alex, given the time that's passed since the crime, it'll still be circumstantial evidence. We need something more substantial." Holiday nodded thoughtfully. "Keep working on the truck. I'll try to find out who this Rick Tanner guy is and how the truck got to him." The next few days passed in intense work. Holiday obtained surveillance tapes from the neighborhood where Gonzalez had purchased the truck. One of them did show a man who looked like a composed portrait handing over the keys to the truck, but the image quality was too poor for reliable identification. He also requested the truck's movement history from traffic camera and toll highway readings. It turned out the vehicle had traveled from Austin through West Texas to El Paso about a week before it was sold to Gonzalez. Forensics confirmed that the blood in the truck belonged to Jack Murphy, and the hair found in the cab could have belonged to a woman with the same DNA type as Emily. But they needed a sample of her to make an exact comparison, and the judge hadn't given a warrant yet. The evidence was too circumstantial. Holiday decided to come at it from a different angle. He went back to the starting point, the place where Jack had disappeared, a wooded area near Bastrop, the missing man's favorite hunting ground. The detective had spent the day circling the area with the forensics team. They used GPR and other advanced equipment to search for hidden graves or caches. The day was coming to an end, and hope was melting away when one of the techs called out to Holiday. "Detective, there's something here." GPR was showing an anomaly about 2 meters deep, something metallic and quite large. "Start digging," Holiday ordered, feeling his heart pounding in his chest. They worked until dark, illuminating the dig site with floodlights. Finally, the shovel hit something hard. Clearing the ground, the forensics team found a metal container, a sealed toolbox. Holiday pulled on gloves and carefully opened the find. Inside was a gun wrapped in a plastic bag. Next to it was a box of ammunition and a few personal items, a wristwatch, a ring, a wallet. The watch was engraved, "To Jack from Emily, forever yours." "Bingo," Holiday whispered. It was a murder weapon and proof that Jack wasn't leaving willingly. A man doesn't leave his wedding ring and watch in the woods if he decides to start a new life. That same night, Holiday obtained a search warrant for the Blackwell home and a DNA sample from Emily. He decided to act immediately before the suspects had time to do anything. Emily wasn't home. Ryan, who answered the phone, looked tense and aggressive. "My wife isn't home, Detective. She's gone to visit her sister in Dallas." Holiday knew that was a lie. Emily didn't have a sister in Dallas, according to the paperwork. But he calmly produced the warrant. "Mr. Blackwell, I have a warrant to search your home and collect DNA samples from you and your wife. Please step aside." As the forensics team searched the house, Holiday watched Ryan closely. He was somber and silent, but he didn't seem particularly concerned. It was as if he knew they wouldn't find anything. Indeed, the search was inconclusive. No suspicious items, documents, or weapons. That was odd. Holiday had expected the couple to panic after his visit and the information about the truck they'd found. "Where's your wife, Mr. Blackwell?" the detective asked again. Ryan folded his arms across his chest. "I already told you. At her sister's in Dallas. Here's the address and phone number." He held out a piece of paper to Holiday. The detective checked the address against the database. It was indeed registered to one Margaret Thompson, but there was no connection to Emily. "Thanks for your cooperation," Holiday said dryly and headed for the exit. Already in the car, he called a colleague in Dallas and asked him to check the address. An hour later, the answer came back that Margaret Thompson, a 60-year-old widow, did indeed live at that address, and no Emily was there. Holiday felt alarmed. Emily had disappeared right after his visit and the discovery of the truck. It couldn't be a coincidence. She'd fled, but to where? He returned to the office and began checking credit cards, bank accounts, airline tickets, anything that might indicate Emily's whereabouts. Nothing so far. If she was planning an escape, she was proceeding with extreme caution. Holiday's phone rang. It was the medical examiner. "Detective, we checked the gun. It has powder residue on it. It was fired, and we found prints. One set belongs to Jack Murphy. His prints are in the database from work. And the other one, we matched them to prints collected at the Blackwell house. They belong to Ryan Blackwell." "Are you sure?" Holiday felt adrenaline rushing through his veins. 100%. We also found blood residue on the inside of the container lid. The DNA matches Jack Murphy's. Holiday immediately requested an arrest warrant for Ryan Blackwell on suspicion of Jack Murphy's murder, and drove to his work address, the same construction site where Emily had met him a few days earlier. But Ryan wasn't at work. The construction manager said he'd taken a family leave of absence starting today. Holiday cursed himself for procrastinating. They both took off, but they couldn't get far. All airports, train stations, and roads would be checking their names and faces. Back in the office, the detective discovered new information from the finance department. The day before the truck was found, Emily had withdrawn $20,000 in cash from her account, the maximum amount that could be withdrawn without special notice to the bank. That same day, Ryan had cashed a check for $15,000, ostensibly for construction materials. They were preparing to flee. But to where? Holiday was going over every possible option in his head when a young officer entered the office. "Detective Holiday, there's a call for you on line 2. Female, refuses to identify herself. Says she has information on the Murphy case." Alex Holiday picked up the phone, feeling his heart pounding somewhere in his throat. Over his years as a detective, he had learned to recognize the moments when a case was ready to open, and now was that moment. "Detective Holiday," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "This is Sandra Mitchell," said a female voice on the other end of the line. "I'm a friend of Emily's, an ex-girlfriend. I think we need to talk about Jack Murphy." Holiday straightened in his chair. Sandra Mitchell was the same woman who had confirmed Emily's alibi 5 years ago. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm listening to you." "Not on the phone," Sandra's voice shook. "Can we meet in an hour at the Bluebird Cafe on Lavaca Street? I'll be in the far corner wearing a red blouse." "I'll be there," Holiday replied. Hanging up the phone, he immediately gave orders to check Ryan Blackwell's whereabouts and increase surveillance of airports and train stations. Then he grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. The Bluebird Cafe was located in a quiet corner of downtown Austin. It was a small, cozy establishment with dimmed lights and soft music. Sandra Mitchell was sitting exactly where she'd promised, at the far table, nervously rubbing her napkin. She was in her mid-40s, with short brown hair and the tired face of someone carrying a heavy load for a long time. "Detective Holliday?" she asked as he approached the table. Holliday nodded and sat down across from her. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Mrs. Mitchell. You said you had information about the Jack Murphy case." Sandra took a deep breath. "I lied 5 years ago," she said quietly. "Emily didn't come to see me the day Jack disappeared. She asked me to confirm her alibi, and I agreed. We'd been friends since college, and I didn't think it was that serious." Holliday tried to keep a neutral expression on his face, but inside everything was jubilant. "Finally. What made you change your statement now, Mrs. Mitchell?" She averted her eyes. "I saw the news about finding Jack's truck, and then Emily called me yesterday, asking me to lend her money. A lot of money. Said she and Ryan needed to get away right away. I said no, and she actually admitted that she and Ryan killed Jack." Holliday pulled out a notepad. "Are you ready to give a formal statement?" "Yes," Sandra nodded. "I can't live with this anymore." "One more thing, Detective. Emily said she and Ryan are going to Mexico. Ryan has a brother in Tijuana who will help them cross the border." Holliday immediately contacted the department and relayed the information. He and Sandra then went to the station where she officially changed her statement. Holliday now had enough probable cause to request a warrant to tap the suspects' phones and check all their contacts, including Ryan's relatives. Sandra's information was confirmed. Ryan did indeed have a half-brother, Eduardo Santos, living in Tijuana. Ryan had called him 3 times in the last week. The next 48 hours passed feverishly. Roadblocks were set up on the main roads to the Mexican border, and APBs were sent out to all the border crossings. Detectives checked motels, hostels, rental apartments. At the same time, CSIs returned to the woods near Bastrop, where Jack had disappeared. Now that they knew what to look for, the search was much more efficient. With the help of specially trained dogs, they explored a section of the forest with a radius of 2 kilometers from the place where the container with the weapon was found. On the second day of the search, one of the dogs signaled near a large mossy tree. The area was heavily waterlogged, and forensic investigators began to carefully excavate the soil. Holliday received word of the find while he was at a meeting to coordinate the search for the fugitives. He immediately drove to the site. By the time he arrived, the forensic team had already recovered the remains of a man wrapped in a tarp from the swampy soil. Preliminary examination confirmed. This man was killed by a shot in the head. A hunting license in the name of Jack Murphy was found on him. "After all these years," Holliday muttered, looking at the remains. "We finally found you, Jack." The body was sent to the lab to be formally identified, and the exact cause of death determined. And Holliday went back to searching for the suspects he now knew for sure were the killers. The breakthrough in the search for Emily and Ryan happened on the 3rd day after Sandra's statement. A patrol officer in the small Texas town of El Paso, located right on the border with Mexico, spotted a suspicious couple in a roadside motel. A man and woman matching the description of the wanted men checked in under the names Richard and Joan Tyler. Holliday immediately traveled to El Paso with a SWAT team. The sting operation was conducted early in the morning while the suspects were still asleep. Emily and Ryan were taken by surprise and offered no resistance. They were taken to the El Paso Police Department, where Holliday personally conducted the interrogation. He started with Emily, deciding that she might be the weaker link. Emily sat across from him, pale and drained, but still retaining a vestige of arrogance. "Mrs. Blackwell," Holliday began, "we found the body of your first husband, Jack Murphy. Forensics confirmed he was killed by a gunshot to the head from a gun we found in the woods. The gun has the fingerprints of your current husband, Ryan Blackwell, on it." He paused, watching Emily's reaction carefully. She sat unmoving, only her fingers trembling slightly. "Your friend Sandra Mitchell has admitted to giving you a false alibi. We have all the evidence that you planned Jack's murder so you could get insurance and start a new life with Ryan." Emily was silent. "Ryan's already testifying in the next room." Holiday lied. He said the whole thing was your idea, that you made him shoot Jack. It was an old but effective trick. Emily threw her head up, her eyes sparkling. That's not true. Ryan would never... She faltered, realizing she'd fallen into a trap. Go on, Mrs. Blackwell, Holiday said softly. Tell me how it really was. Emily was silent for a long moment, as if weighing her options. Then she nodded slowly. I want a deal. Immunity in exchange for a full confession. That's out of my area of expertise, Holiday replied. But I can talk to the prosecutor. If your testimony helps us fully reconstruct the crime, you may be able to avoid the death penalty. At the mention of the death penalty, Emily flinched. In Texas, aggravated murder was taken very seriously. All right, she finally said. I'll tell you everything. Holiday turned on the recorder and read out the standard rights warning. Jack and we haven't gotten along for a long time, Emily began. He was obsessed with work, always off on these hunts of his. We lived like neighbors, not husband and wife. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I met Ryan at a charity event. He worked for a company that was building a new branch of our bank. There was an instant connection between us. We started dating, and I realized I wanted to be with him, not Jack. Why didn't you file for divorce? Holiday asked. Emily grinned bitterly. We had a prenup. In the event of a divorce, I got nothing. But if Jack died, I was entitled to $500,000 in insurance. Ryan offered to solve the problem once and for all. She described how they'd planned the murder, meticulously, methodically, thinking through every detail. Jack regularly traveled to the same place to hunt. Ryan studied the area, picked the perfect spot for an ambush. That day, I walked Jack out as usual, Emily continued. Then I called Ryan, told him everything was going according to plan. He was already waiting in the woods. Ryan had spotted Jack not far from his hunting ground. He came out as if by accident, struck up a conversation. Jack was even glad to have the company. They drank a can of beer that Ryan had saved in advance. Then, as Jack turned to point to the deer trail, Ryan shot him in the back of the head. We dug a hole in the swampy part of the woods beforehand. Emily's voice went completely quiet. Ryan wrapped the body in a tarp and buried it there. He hid Jack's rifle under some leaves and the gun in a metal box. We planned to come back in a couple months and get rid of the guns for good, but then we decided it was too risky. Jack's truck was part of the plan too. Ryan drove it to a garage they'd rented under an assumed name. There the car sat for several years until they decided to get rid of it by selling it through a chain of front men. Rick Tanner. That was Ryan in a wig and a false beard, Emily said. He sold the truck to this Mexican guy, Gonzalez, for cash. We thought the truck would get lost. No one would ever connect it to us. Holiday listened, making notes. The story made sense and matched the evidence they already had. When you realized we found the truck, did you decide to run? He asked. Emily nodded. We knew it was the end. The plan was to move to Mexico and from there somewhere in South America. Ryan has connections there through his brother. After Emily's confession, Holiday moved on to question Ryan. But the latter, upon learning that his friend had already confessed to everything, broke down much more quickly. He corroborated her version, adding some details about exactly how the murder happened. He didn't even realize what happened, Ryan said with a detached expression. Just collapsed to the ground. It was over in a second. A week after Emily and Ryan's arrest, lab tests officially confirmed that the remains found were those of Jack Murphy, and the cause of death was a gunshot to the back of the head from a gun found in a metal box. The district attorney denied Emily's request for a plea deal. Both she and Ryan were charged with aggravated first-degree murder, premeditated, especially cruel and acquisitive. Alex Holiday attended the Blackwells' first court hearing. He watched them being led into the courtroom in handcuffs and orange prison robes. Emily looked 10 years older, and Ryan just looked devastated. They didn't even look at each other. After the meeting, a gray-haired man, Jack Murphy's father, approached Holiday. "Detective, I wanted to thank you," he said, extending his hand. "You didn't give up on this case even when everyone else waved goodbye. Now we can finally bury our son and say goodbye to him." Holiday shook the old man's hand. "I was just doing my job, Mr. Murphy. It's a shame it had to end this way. You know, the old man smiled sadly. Jack always said, the truth will find its way out, no matter how deep you bury it. He'd be glad to have you prove him right. That evening, Holiday stood in the cemetery, watching Jack Murphy's family finally bury his remains in the family crypt. 5 years is a long time to wait for justice, but better late than never. Having finished the formalities of the case, Holiday returned to his office. He looked at Jack Murphy's case file, which was now complete and finished. The story of a man who had gone hunting and never returned because he had fallen victim to the greed and betrayal of those closest to him. Emily and Ryan were found guilty on all charges. Given the gravity of the crime and the lack of mitigating circumstances, the court sentenced them to life in prison without parole. Marco Gonzalez, the unsuspecting buyer of the truck, was fully acquitted and was compensated for the inconvenience of the investigation. Sandra Mitchell, despite initially lying under oath, was shown leniency by the court in exchange for cooperating with the investigation. Jack's old green truck, which served as a clue to the case, remained in the police parking lot as an exhibit. After the end of all appeals, it was planned to return it to the family of the deceased, and Detective Alex Holiday was already flipping through a new case file. The work was never finished, but the satisfaction of restoring justice, however belatedly, gave him the strength to move on. It was already dark when he left the police department building. Holiday pulled up the collar of his jacket to protect himself from the cool evening wind and headed for his car. Ahead was a well-deserved rest after weeks of intense work. He knew that the Jack Murphy case would stay with him forever, one of those investigations that define a detective's career. The story of how the truth did find its way out, despite all attempts to hide it under layers of lies and dirt. Sitting in the car, Holiday allowed himself a moment of reflection. 5 years ago, Emily and Ryan thought they had committed the perfect crime. They'd planned it, covered their tracks, created false evidence. But, as is often the case, it was their attempts to complicate things that ended up being their biggest mistake. If they had simply left Jack's truck in the woods, they might never have been caught. It's amazing how fate sometimes twists a plot better than any detective novel. One casual glance at the license plate by a patrolman, and all the carefully constructed lies fall apart like a house of cards. Holiday started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot. Ahead was home, a hot shower and a glass of whiskey, and then a new day and new mysteries. But the story of the hunter who disappeared 5 years ago finally had an ending. Justice had been served, albeit belatedly.